Good morning, Tom. How are you this morning? Yeah, congratulations on the 20 years, by the way. But this involves an assisted living facility in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. And my great uncle actually lived out the remaining years of his life there. A great facility used to be called the Seasons, and it was bought by a Chicago based assisted living facility company here a few years ago named Enlivened with an E. And they apparently own assisted living facilities all over the country. And they have, a quick Google search can reveal that they've been very progressive, I guess you could say, in their positions on, sort of like the Major League Sports. Like they've taken upon themselves to enter the political fray and force the vaccine on all their employees, and I would imagine residents as well. So my client is an employee for the past 5 years or so at the Greenbrier County facility, and she had the experience of them trying to force her to take the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and at first it was sort of a verbal request that they were making, and they made it known to their employees that there was a, quote, expectation that all the employees be vaccinated. And my client started to do research and became very concerned that there were risks for the taking the vaccine at this point, and that it wasn't right for her. And finally, they forced her and put it in writing and told her that she would be fired by June 1st of 2021 if she didn't get vaccinated, and she in fact was fired. So she came to me, and we filed a lawsuit. I think the particular reason is that she researched the safety, that she wasn't being told by the media and by the government. And when you do just a little bit of research, when you find the truth, you'll see that there have already been over 4,000 deaths reported from the vaccine, and that is like 70% higher than previous vaccines. I mean, it's really just a huge number, and it's not being talked about. Most other things, if you look at like FDA history, products would be pulled from the shelves with this sort of with this sort of thing happening, but it's not happening here. And in fact, people aren't even being given the choice. So she found out that it wasn't as safe as being represented, and that she's supposed to have, by federal law, a choice of whether to take it or not. And she wasn't being given that choice. And so she realized that they were acting illegally. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there really can be no dispute that this vaccine is not approved by the FDA. It's acting under an emergency use authorization letter, and I've actually attached a copy of Pfizer's EUA letter to the complaint, and it's posted on my website at thecivilrightslawyer.com. But I mean, you don't need to take CNN's word for it, or you don't need to take any celebrity with a blue check mark on social media's word for it. Look at the FDA's actual authorization letter to Pfizer, for instance. You can read it yourself. And it basically mandates that there has to be informed consent before people take these vaccines, and that people have to have the choice, the voluntary choice to take it. That's part of the legal authorization for this being used under emergency circumstances, and we're pretending like that federal law doesn't exist. So absolutely, the federal government is not allowed, or federal law requires that the vaccines cannot be mandated. Now, regular vaccines can, that have been approved by the FDA. For instance, flu vaccines, and you typically get about 20 to 30 deaths per year with a flu vaccine, which, by the way, is administered at a much greater rate, according to the numbers. And here, in just a short amount of time that we've had the COVID vaccine, we've had like 4,300 deaths. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory. It all comes from the vaccine reporting numbers. I mean, it's really not, it's not in dispute. So we have actual damage being done by the vaccine. We have a federal law that states that the vaccine is not yet approved and cannot be mandated. And yet, in reality, like everything else we've seen the past year, the government just works through its corporate cronies to mandate things which under our Constitution, under our existing law, are not supposed to be mandated. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so you have things like, for instance, in my little area here in the Greenbrier Valley, very, very conservative area, generally, with the exception of just the little town of Lewisburg. And you don't see people wearing masks. I mean, you just don't. I mean, when they come from Northern Virginia or they come down from New Jersey, whatever, I mean, you see them a mile away. I mean, they're wearing a mask that covers 3/4 of their face. Or with the exception of elderly people who have been, they've really been brainwashed and that they're scared to death to go outside. And it's really unfortunate because they're going outside and they're just wearing this, reused mask all over their face. I mean, it's just sad. Or children. But for the most part, most people, they're not wearing masks. And, like I said, it's a conservative area. But then you have these companies where we have to go shop, like Walmart or Lowe's, and they're bringing, just like Enliven is here in this case we're talking about, they're bringing their Chicago values, or their blue city, blue state, California, New York, wherever. They're bringing their blue values to all these small red towns where us regular folks have to go shop there, and we have to abide by their blue state values, which obviously worked very well in New York, for instance. And maybe the exception to that is Florida. And if you go down to Florida, I mean, it's amazing. It's like a breath of fresh air as far as the masks are concerned. Because, I mean, there's even on the big box stores, I mean, I think they're afraid to put to mandate masks in their stores. But I know we're not talking about masks, but the same sort of deal. We've moved on from masks to vaccines, and they're using the masks in West Virginia anyways to try to ramp up the numbers for the vaccine. So even though they know masks don't work and actually can be harmful, they're using them as leverage, saying you can take the mask off if you're vaccinated. I mean, really, it really is unreal. I mean, if you'd asked me a year and a half ago if we'd be looking at something like this, I mean, truth is stranger than fiction. Well, it really is absolutely disgusting, and like you, Tom, my first principles here really, or my primary foundation in my philosophy, anyways, is less government. I mean, less government, less taxes. Just stay out of my way. Let me live my life, and that generally, would apply to businesses, like if their business, their rules, sort of thing. But I think they've crossed a line here. They've crossed a line, and I think the only way that we're going to stop this is by suing these companies. I mean, they've crossed the line from their business, their rules, to affirmatively and proactively violating our natural rights. I mean, it remains to be seen how best to put this in terms of litigation or legal theory. But it has to be done, and that's part of the reason I filed this lawsuit, is because somebody's got to start litigating these things. And as far as I know, this was the third of these types of lawsuits that were filed in the country, and the most difficult. And that's why I wanted to do it, because if you're suing a federal government employer, like the first case that was filed in New Mexico for a correctional facility, it's much easier because a federal government or a state government employer can violate any of your civil rights because they're the government. So an employee, a public employee, can just point to any civil rights violation, and it can be committed by a public employer. However, if your employer is a private company, private companies cannot violate your civil rights according to the law. I mean, you have no First Amendment right in regards to a private employer. You have no Fourth Amendment right. So you have no civil rights. So you have whatever your state law statutory law is, or your federal statutory law, such as skin color discrimination, sex discrimination, that sort of thing. So what we have here is, you have to think outside the box to try to bring the civil rights that we're supposed to have to the private employee context, because we know the government is working through these these employers, because the employers are basically immune from civil rights violations and lawsuits because they're not the government, but yet they're working hand in hand with the government. So we have to really use the tools of the left here and engage in judicial activism, because we know our coward legislators and legislatures, they're not going to do it. They could pass legislation right now that says, or whenever they're in session anyways, that says that private employers cannot violate whatever rights they want to protect. But they're not going to do it. So lawsuits need to be filed, and this is a difficult one because you have a private employer and they're violating federal law, no doubt about it. The question is does the private employee have a remedy? And so what I've done is sort of use the strategy they used in Texas in the second lawsuit that was filed, is to use the existing state law theory of retaliatory discharge. And that's basically stating that the employee, yeah, it's an at-will employment state. An employer can generally fire an employee for any reason they want, so long as it's not like skin color or something. But if if it's like a whistleblower situation, or in so doing they're violating some federal or state law or public policy, then there is a legal theory there that it's in violation of public policy. And that's what I've done here, because there is West Virginia case law that says that they make an exception to the general at-will employment doctrine where the employer is violating public policy, and that's in part defined as violating state or federal law. And there's no doubt that federal law says that the vaccines are not supposed to be mandated. So we'll see what happens here. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever get my hopes up again. When I was trying to fight all the executive orders and the state of emergency all last year, I was told sort of privately, like, don't worry, we're gonna fix this. We're gonna fix this through legislation. It needs to be fixed by legislation, and it was never done. And I don't think it's ever going to happen, because drug companies are probably the worst. I mean, I imagine they spend millions of dollars with lobbyists, and I'm sure they're lobbying legislatures around the country. I mean, look what they were able to do in our state with opiates. I mean, they do what they want, and I don't think our legislature is going to do anything about this. It was filed in state court in Greenbrier County, so Greenbrier County Circuit Court, and I would have liked to have filed this case in federal court, and it may end up there, but it's really a state law claim because it's a retaliatory discharge claim. And by the way, through May 10th, 2021, there were 4,434 death reports from the vaccine and over 12,619 serious injuries reported. And again, this is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It's a national early warning system dedicated to safety problems in U.S. Licensed vaccines. So it's undisputed. Again, and that's compared to like 20 to 30 deaths a year reported from the flu vaccine, which is more widely administered. And in comparison, from July 1st, 1997 until December 31st of 2013, that database received only 666 adult death reports. And we've already received 4,434 just so far with the COVID vaccine. So, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory. And if you look at the documents that between Pfizer and the FDA, I mean, they're representing that there's not safety information for children. There's not safety information for people who are immunocompromised. And in fact, it says that people who are immunocompromised or taking blood thinners or various other medical circumstances should talk to the vaccine provider before getting stuck with a needle. And they don't say what should happen because that's medical advice. And so, that's really what we're missing here is medical decisions being made on a patient-by-patient basis. But the FDA also says that there are certain people who absolutely should not get the vaccine under any circumstances, such as anyone who's had a severe allergic reaction to any ingredient in these vaccines. And so, I mean, what? And yet we have all these companies, all these governors, and all these bureaucrats wanting to mandate it on everybody, not on a case by case basis. So that's, this is about freedom. If you want to choose the vaccine, you take the vaccine. But nobody should be forced to participate in any sort of health care without voluntary consent. I mean, that's really evil stuff. And that's why I've also mentioned in this lawsuit that it violates, I mean, the basic tenets of the Nuremberg Code. That, something that we established and all agreed on after the horrors of World War II, that never again are we going to allow any population of people to be experimented on or had health care, quote, health care forced on them without any voluntary choice on their behalf. I mean, it really is sick. Absolutely. And you know what? I'd love to sue that company. And if somebody works for an employer or knows somebody who was mandated to take the vaccine, and there was a serious side effect or a death, let's sue that company. Let's sue them. I will, Tom. Thanks for having me on.